everyone. This is Garrick Zoeter, clarinet professor at the Shenandoah Conservatory in Winchester, Virginia. And I'm coming to you today with yet another clinic on the, this time, 2020 prepared B-flat clarinet piece for the All Virginia Band and Orchestra audition coming up in a few weeks. So we're going to follow the usual plan that I've done in the past 2 years. I will play the piece for you, this time from Armstrong Concert Hall here at Shenandoah. And then we'll go back to my studio and I will give you some helpful hints and suggestions to help you play this piece. This one's a bit tougher this year, so there's a lot to go over, and here we go. All right, so let's talk about the piece, right? This piece is considerably more difficult technically than the pieces we've had in the last 2 years. This is very challenging to play, so I wish you all good luck right here at the beginning of the video with this piece. And I hope that some of the things I can tell you now will help you to play it the very best you can, yeah? So let's talk a little bit about the character of this piece, right? I like very much the character of this piece. I think it's very intense, it's very dramatic, it's very driving music. It's actually very fun to play, although again, the technical requirements or demands of this are quite extensive. There are accents throughout the piece which really propel the energy constantly forward and really allow you to play in a really energetic and engaging way, which is great. But the overall rule with this piece is that you can't rush, right? If you start to rush in this piece, your fingers are going to get out of control very, 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 very fast, and the piece is going to break down very quickly. So remember to practice the piece slowly, okay, before you start to work the tempo up. Now the tempo is dotted chord note equals 84, which is not especially fast, but it is fast enough to make a lot of these passages quite difficult to play. So go very slowly, and remember this, that we are very much used to thinking about playing slowly so that our fingers play the correct notes, right? We play passages slowly, make sure we're playing things correctly, and then speed them up. But there's an additional aspect of this that I want you all to think about, and that is that one of the main reasons we actually practice pieces slowly is for our ear. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that when our ear knows the correct notes to play and can anticipate them, you will play 1,000 times more accurately and correctly than you will when your ear doesn't know the melody. An example of this would be if I were to ask you to sing Happy Birthday. I have a feeling you could do it instantly, right now. And the reason is because that melody, that tune, and those words are embedded in your ear, and thus they're embedded in your brain, and thus you are able to reproduce the piece in a second. We want to be able to do the same thing when we play the clarinet in all the pieces we play. And so remember, we are practicing slowly so that our ear will therefore remember the correct sequence of notes i.e. the melody, and be able to send the signal to your fingers to play them correctly. Okay? I think this is a very, 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 very important thing. Once you can hear the piece correctly, once you can sing it back, and believe me, you don't want to sing this one back because that would be a little bit too challenging, but once you have the tunes in your ear and you can hum them to yourself a little bit, and you know what's coming, and your ear knows what's coming, you will be able to play the piece a lot more accurately. Okay, so as you work on the piece slowly, which I'm sure all of you are going to do, keep this in mind. It's not just because of your fingers, it's because your ear needs to know the correct sequence of notes and needs to memorize the correct sequence of notes, and then inform your fingers of exactly where to play. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. Now let's talk about, again, going back to the character, very intense, very driving. Let's look at the beginning of the piece, right? To me, these first 1, 2, 3, 4 measures here, first 3 measures, including the upbeat, really sounds like a fanfare to me, right? It's like a trumpet. It has a very triumphant feel. So I suggest thinking of yourself really as a trumpeter in these opening measures. Really play them out, really play with a soaring sound that projects very well so that you sound very confident from the beginning of the piece. This is also very important when you do an audition. You want to sound confident from the very first moment that you start playing, okay? And this piece affords a great opportunity to do that. Now, a couple of technical things I'm noticing here. Looking at measure 2, and when I refer to the measure numbers, remember that the pickup, the measure with the pickup at the very beginning doesn't count as a measure. So measure 1 is really the one that begins with the written A, okay? So in measure 2, one of the things that might trip you up is to make sure that you remember to tongue each of the group of triplets on the 3rd beat in measure 2, okay? Don't slur them. Your impulse probably will be to slur them, and oftentimes in a piece that's rapid and quick, it's very difficult for us to remember all of these things or to notice these things. We're very much worried about the notes, and so some of the articulations tend to go away. So do make sure at the end of measure 2 there that you tongue the F and the D at the beginning of the 2 triplets there in measure 3. Okay, I think that's important. Going on, let's take a look at measure 4, right? Measure 4 is a nasty measure. There's no way to get around it. This is extremely difficult to play. I will do my best to give you some suggestions here on how to work it out, but this is one of these measures where, you know, you cross your fingers and hope on the day of the audition that everything's going to go well in the moment, because this one is very, very awkward to play. So let's take a look at it. One thing we can do when we have measures that involve awkward passages is to look at notes in the measure, and again we're looking at measure 4 here, the 5/8 measure, notes in the measure that repeat over and over again, right? Patterns, essentially. So obviously we have rhythmic pattern here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We have the rhythmic pattern, but we also have certain notes that appear over and over in a pattern. One of these is A flat, right? So in looking at that measure 4, each of the groupings, the 3 triplet groupings, and the last quarter note grouping, they all start with A flat, right? So this is important. This is kind of like what I would call an anchor note that runs throughout the whole measure and anchors the passage down. We start from an A flat, we go away from the A flat, and we come back to the A flat, right? And we always come back to the A flat on the downbeats. So if you can hear that and you can feel that in the fingers, this is a hard one to feel in the fingers because we're only using this key here. But if you can do that, it'll help you anchor down the passage. It'll help you play it a lot more securely. Now the passage is very awkward technically. So doing this will certainly help you, but we might need to find another anchor note in that measure. And the note that I like to use in addition to the A flat as an anchor in that measure is the E flat, this E flat, right? We have it at the end of the first triplet, the end of the second triplet. We have it again at the very end of the measure, at the end of the last 16th note grouping, right? And E flat is a note rather that uses almost all the fingers, right? We don't have the pinky here, but we got everything else down. So we, in a sense, are able to grab that note. So picture this, and this might sound a little funny, but picture this. Picture that all of the notes in measure 4 are running by in front of you. Okay, there they go. They're running in front of you. There goes the E flat, there goes the C, there goes the other A flat, there goes an F sharp, right? And what if you were to reach out and grab one of those notes as it went by, right? So let's say it's the E flat. So every time the E flat comes by, running by in front of you, you reach out and you grab it and you pull it to yourself like this, right? Essentially, that's what we want to do in this passage when we're playing it. So in other words, you're going to grab that E flat, right? At the end of that first triplet, at the end of the second triplet, and then you're going to return to it at the very end of the measure. And again, this is a note that you can grab easily because you're using all the fingers, right? So that's going to help you play the passage. A flat, E flat act as anchor notes. These are notes that you grab and hold on to as you're playing the passage. Now the passage goes by a bit quickly, so it's tricky to do that, but I think if you're able to do that, that's going to help you negotiate this passage a little bit easier, okay? This is probably one of the most difficult measures that I've seen in these pieces in the last 2 years, or rather 3 years now since we've been doing these videos. And so, good luck. I know you can do it. All right? So, let's then take a look at measures 5 through 8, okay? Measures 5 through 8 are basically just 16th note sequences, right? That have slurrings in different places. This makes it awkward, right? We're very used to playing the clarinet. We're used to playing slur 2, tongue 2 if we worked on Weber. We're used to playing this articulation, right? This articulation appears in this measure, but it's not the only articulation that appears in this measure, right? If we look at measure 5, we have tongue 1, slur 2, tongue 1, slur 2, tongue 2, tongue 2, slur 2. The next measure, the 2-4, we have slur 2, tongue 1, slur 2, tongue 2, right? So the tonguing and slurring has been moved all over the different beats, right? So be careful with that. Again, practice it slowly, listen to yourself, and make sure that you're actually playing the articulations that are written there, okay? Also throughout these measures, 5 through 8, we have a lot of accents, right? And they are in different parts of the beats, which when you listen to it is actually a very, very effective compositional technique. You hear this compositional technique in a lot of what we call new music, music written in the late 20th century, here in the 21st century, right? You hear these accented notes that are spaced all over the place. And this is a prime example of this here in this piece. So there's a piece you can listen to on YouTube, and I will post the notes that I'm talking about now. I will post them at the end of the video, so you'll be able to see a little bit more specifically what I've been talking about, and you'll also be able to go to the links that I'm going to talk about now. So there's a piece, a clarinet concerto by a composer named Anders Hilborg, that was written for fantastic, probably one of the great clarinetists of all time, Martin Frost. And you can listen to this piece. This piece is a prime example of how to do these accents that pop out of nowhere, and then are followed by notes in the 16th note runs that are not accented, okay? So I suggest you listen to the piece, and again, if you go to the end of this video, you will see my writings about the piece, notes about the piece that I've written down here that I'm referring to here, and I have put the link and the time stamp in the video where you should listen to it, okay? And that will give you a prime example of how these randomly accented notes within a passage of 16ths on the clarinet sound. And then you're going to try to duplicate that when you play these measures in the piece. It's actually a really cool effect on the clarinet, and it's a very popular compositional technique. So if you go on to be a performance major in college, chances are you're going to encounter pieces that employ this type of compositional technique. So this is a really good chance to work on it now. Okay? All right, let's look at measures 9 through 11. Here we have a rather rapid run at the beginning of measure 9, followed again by these randomly selected accents that you're going to want to really pop out and play with a really tremendous amount of energy and vitality. That's really essential in terms of getting these notes out. And I might also add that, really playing the clarinet with a lot of energy and vitality means that you fill the instrument up with a lot of air, right? This piece this year gives you an ample opportunity to do this. You fill the clarinet up with a lot of air, really blow through the instrument, right? And direct that air in a way that creates a really energetic sound, okay? And the truth of the matter is that when we do this on the clarinet, when we play out on the clarinet, our fingers respond in a very positive way, okay? The air, I like to think of it this way, that the air we use on the clarinet infuses our fingers with an energy and a response that causes them to play more accurately. In other words, that air is the fuel for successful note accuracy. I think it's really true. If there's one thing that I see as a clarinet professor a lot, are students who come and play with a very weak airstream that do not fill up the instrument with a lot of air, and therefore their technique suffers. So my suggestion here to all of you is to be courageous. Be courageous, fill up the clarinet with a lot of air, play out as much as you can, and not only will your technique improve, but your level of confidence and the level of confidence that comes through in your playing will also improve and will be striking to the listener. And I think that's really important. Okay? Okay, going back to the piece, let's look at measure 12. There's obviously a ritardando written at the end of the measure. The dotted line extends over the end of measure 12, but for some reason, which I can't quite figure out, appears to disappear in measure 13. If you listen to the performance I did at the beginning of the video, you'll notice that I've extended the ritardando through measure 13. I think that makes more musical sense to me. So that's what I did. You can decide whether you want to do that or not. I don't know whether the people listening to you and judging you would fault you if you did something like that. I have a feeling they would not. So if you want to extend the ritardando through measure 13, I don't think that's a bad idea. And if you look at measure 13, you should realize that you've kind of heard this melody before, right? And where have we heard this before? Measure 1, right? So measure 13 is basically kind of what I would call a reminiscence of the material in measure 1. This time we hear it at a lower dynamic, and we also, if you do the ritardando in measure 13, we hear it stretched out over the whole measure. So I think that's an effective thing to do, okay? Let's see. Yes, going back to measure 12 really quickly, just note that at the end of measure 12, in the third beat, if you do not have the left-hand auxiliary key, and I'm guessing the majority of you probably do not, you do need to use the left-hand C key over here, right, in order to negotiate the last beat of measure 12. So do make sure you do that. If you try to slide between the E flat and the right-hand C, you're going to get a glitch in there at the end of measure 12, which you don't want. Okay? Good. All right, so let's move on. We're now looking at measure 14 through 16. Here we have a character change in the music, right? The music has slowed down. We no longer have a lot of tongued notes, but this time we have a really beautiful legato line. So that's what you want to do here in 14, 15, and 16. You want to play the most beautiful legato you can. I suggest dropping the dynamic back a lot, probably even more than I did in the video. Because I was playing in a boomy hall, I perhaps didn't actually play as soft as I could have. I think you all can probably play softer. So play softer in 14 and 15 and in 16. And then we have, at the end of 16, we have this poco accelerando that goes through measure 17, again starting piano and building through the measure, okay? And just to go back to measure 15 really quickly, again, this is a place where we need to start the passage in the left-hand C, okay? That's very important so that we can negotiate that passage, okay? Good. All right, so let's take a look at 16 to 17. We've already mentioned the poco accelerando. Basically, you're going to speed up slightly, and then according to what's indicated in the music, when you get to measure 18, you're going to slam on the brakes, right? Because all of a sudden we have a rallentando there. So you can slow down, maybe not immediately, but certainly by the time you get past the second beat, you should be slowing down through that. And as you heard on my performance, I slowed down quite a bit in measure 19. Make sure you hold the ferrata a nice length, and then I think you can take a break, okay? In other words, a pause. I don't think you need to go right into measure 20 after playing the ferrata E flat. You can let the music kind of come to a rest, recover yourself a little bit, and then pick it up in measure 20. I think that would be very helpful, okay? Again, in measure 20 through 23, we have these energetic accents. Again, the composer here is inverting the slur to tongue to articulations. Sometimes you have slur to tongue to, sometimes you have tongue to and slur to. This is tricky, okay? And again, these are the little details that if you execute them well, are going to separate your performance from someone else's performance, i.e. someone who doesn't do that, okay? So that's important to think about, yeah? Okay, let's talk about measure 22 quickly. At the end of measure 22, we have a high E flat, yes? You're going to have to use a fingering for that E flat that you may not be familiar with, okay? So rather than using the standard fingering of 2, 3, 1, and the fork, you want to stay away from the middle finger fingering, by the way. 2, 3, middle finger, we don't ever want to use, so that's another story, but don't use that. But rather than using 2, 3, 1, and the fork fingering, we're actually going to use 2, 3, the third ring of the right hand, and the E flat key, okay? Along with, of course, your register key here in the back. So the E flat fingering at the end of measure 22 is 2, 3 on the left hand, third ring of the right hand, and right E flat key, okay? This is an extremely resistant fingering for E flat. You're going to notice that when you compare the feel and the sound of this one to the feel and sound of this one, the fork one, right? But because you're coming from an E flat, an octave below, it is not really possible to all of a sudden jump up and do the fork fingering. Some of you might be able to do it. Some of you might be able to do it. And hey, if it works for you, do it. But if it doesn't work for you, then this alternate fingering here, what we call an alternate fingering or other fingering for E flat, 2, 3, third ring, E flat key, the resistant fingering here for E flat is really what you want to do, because then you can go very easily E flat, right? E flat to E flat, E flat to E flat, that way, okay? So definitely do that. Where are we going? Yes, measure 23. Okay, measure 23, we have high G. I like the fingering of 1 in the left hand and 1, 2 in the right hand, along with your E flat key. I think that's a very strong fingering to use. Tends to play very well in tune, comes out very well. Obviously, there are multiple fingerings for high G. You just want to make sure that the one you're using is in tune compared with the notes that came before it and the notes that are coming after it, okay? We also have the indication ad libitum in this measure of 23, right? That means at your liberty. So in other words, we have chord note equals 72, which is a slower tempo than we had before, and we have the indication of at your liberty, which basically means you are free to play with the rhythm a little bit. So that's something you can do. So I think in that vein, what you could do is lengthen the high G a little bit and then move on. I think that's what I did in the video a little bit, yeah? Of course, what's coming out of measure 23 and the first beat of 24 is quite difficult. So if you can find a way to use the ad libitum or rubato in measure 23 to aid you in getting into measure 24, I suggest doing that. Oftentimes, rubato in music serves two purposes. One is a musical purpose, but sometimes we use rubato in order to allow us to get through a tricky passage a little bit easier. That's a little bit of a secret there, but it's good for you to know that, okay? All right, let's go to measure 25. Actually, let's go to measure 24. Right, the first beat, again, I just mentioned is tricky. It's tricky because there is a leap between F and C sharp here in the second half of the beat, right? And there's also a leap between C sharp and B flat in that same beat. So be careful that you don't fill in that figure with notes in between those notes. In other words, when you go to F to C sharp, make sure you're not playing a D before C sharp. A lot of you probably will have a tendency to do that, or perhaps even an E before the C sharp. Make sure that you're actually doing D to C sharp, okay? And then of course C to B flat instead of C to B natural or C to C natural, okay? Good. Measure 26, we need again to use the left hand C right after the E flat in beat number 3, so that's important, we want to do that. And then in general, looking at measure 25 to the end, we backed up a little bit, measure 25 to the end, notice again that there are those energetic accents in measure 25 as there are in the rest of the piece, but that they go away after that, right? So after the first beat of measure 25, there are no longer any more accents. So you're going to want to think of beat 2 and 3 in 25 and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 26 as a smoother sound. We're no longer accenting the notes. Now we're doing a much smoother legato in the 2-note slurs. So be careful that you don't keep doing the accents there, okay? The tendency, since we've been accenting the whole time in the piece, is to want to keep doing the accents, right? Again, we have to remember these etudes are written in a way to trip us up and to trick us, right? And so noticing these little differences, like the lack of accents in that section, is very important in terms of playing the piece accurately for your audition, okay? Let's see. And then we're going to drop back at the start of measure 27 in dynamic, and we're going to do a big surge through that measure, big crescendo, and then measure 28, 29, we're going to keep the forte up the entire time. Don't do a diminuendo through 28 and 29. You're going to have the, you're probably going to want to do that, but notice that the forte goes all the way through 28 and all the way through 29, and we don't drop back the dynamic actually until the very last measure, okay? And finally, speaking of the last measure, measure 30, this ending reminds me very much of the ending of a piece by Igor Stravinsky. He wrote a piece entitled 3 Pieces for Solo Clarinet, and the third piece in that set, they're very short pieces, the third one's about a minute long, ends in exactly same way, in the exact same way. So again, if you go to the notes section here at the very end of the video, you will see the link where you can find, or you will have the link there where you can go to the video and listen to this. And I will give you the time stamp where to do that. The idea being that this is similar to Stravinsky in that we're playing a very difficult movement the entire time, and then we get to the very end and the composer does this little sort of humorous blip, I guess I would call it, at the end. And so you're going to want to play this at the end in the very similar way that you would play it, or that people play it in the Stravinsky 3 pieces, the third piece. So do listen to that one, and it'll give you an idea of exactly how to do the ending, okay? All right, so I hope that these hints have been helpful for you. If you have questions about the piece, you can ask me in the comments section on the YouTube channel here, and I will do my best to answer you, or you can email me. My email address is gzoeter@su.edu, and I'll do my best to help you as best I can. Good luck, and until next time, take care.